Hi guys, welcome back to our channel. This tutorial and video is long overdue. We've been wanting to teach you guys how to edit neon light photos in our style, and we finally got around to doing it. As you know, one of the must-do things you have to do in Hong Kong when you visit is to come see all the neon lights and take a photo amongst them. And our favorite places are in Jordan and Yamate, if you'd be interested to see them. But first, before we start editing the photo, we're going to show you how to take a good photo so that that foundation sets you up for success in the editing process.
Yeah, so obviously first step, have a tripod. So in our case, we have a Manfrotto carbon fiber. It's great, it's light, because you want the camera to be very still and not shaking. But some photographers, they like to have it handheld, so they have really low aperture. But in our case, we like everything flat and all detailed. And so first step, tripod. Mount the camera on a tripod and have a station where you want it to have the whole picture shot. And so in this case, we have Sam in the middle. In the background, we have all the neon lights. And so you set it to the height that you want. Usually I have it a little bit lower than Sam, so it's kind of looking up at her. And then number two is have a very low ISO slash maybe a speed of shutter around 1 second, half second, and then have her very still. So you can't move. If you move, it'll be blurry, and you don't want that. Okay, so the lower the ISO, the better, because it'll be less grainy when you bump up the blacks. Because in our old previous one, we didn't have a tripod. It was really grainy because when you boost it up, the higher the ISO is, the blacks will have little dots, and you don't want that.
We had no idea what we were doing back then, but we were trying, and so we edited it, and I realized you really need to have a tripod, and you can't have as much movement as you would in the daytime.
Number three is have a higher f-stop, so aperture. So we have ours around f4 to f5, and because we want the picture to be all equally detailed and flat. If you want everything to be like pretty much all evenly visible, then you want that high aperture. If not, you want it to be low because you want the portraits or like some kind of the person, the face to be more, I guess, focused, and the background be blurry. So up to you whether you want, but for us we use a high aperture.
For us, our style of photography is more about the sense of space with the person in the middle, as opposed to some of the photographers you might have seen, Hong Kong photographers. They like to use more bokeh, more shallow depth of field to create some atmosphere and vibe and mood. Yeah. But for us, we're more about having the picture a bit more on the flat side, which is why we use a higher aperture. So I guess that's it. So we'll just get right into it. Here we have the photo I'll be editing today. I've already cropped it to the Instagram dimensions, and I've already adjusted the vertical and the distortion. So if you don't know how to do that, you should see some of our other tutorials. I show you how to do that there in Adobe Lightroom. So the first thing I usually do is I like to play with the highlights, the lowlights, and the exposure. So I want to boost up the photo first, just to see what I'm playing with. Never mind about the overexposed neon signs, we're gonna address that later. So here I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna lower the highlights, boost up the shadows, also lower the whites, and then boost up the blacks a little. And I like to go back and forth with this as we go along. Right underneath here we have the clarity, haze, saturation. I put clarity up just a little bit. The haze, I'm just going to leave vibrance a little bit, and I'm going to just neutralize some of the tones with saturation. Here again with the curves, I'm going to lower the highlights, lower the lights, and then up the darks and the shadows. Generally, when it comes to night photography, what happens in these types of neon photos is that the top part of your photo is going to be very exposed because of what the neon lights are, whereas if you have a person right underneath, it's going to get lost in the shadows. So the goal is to basically balance out the whole photo so the composition looks more cohesive. I'm going to come back with a bit of contrast. So I'm liking how the photo is turning out. So what I'll do next is I like to use the Radial and the Radial and the gradient filter right above here at the top of the right panel on Adobe Lightroom. What these filters do is that it can help you really balance out the photo in certain areas of the photo. So for example, I like using this gradient filter especially in indoor settings where sometimes the room is dark and the window is very bright. And to balance out those tones, I like to use the gradient filters on either side. So if I press O, you'll see this area, which is red, is what is being affected by whatever I do with this gradient filter. So I'm gonna O it for now so you don't see that. And you can see here I've boosted up the exposure a bit already. I'm gonna actually tint it slightly green and slightly cooler. And okay, quickly, this is what will happen if you play around with the tools. This is what's being affected. Okay. Here I'm going to lower the highlights just because for this photo and this composition, all the neon lights are at the top, so I can afford to lower all the highlights here. Here, as you can see at the bottom, if you'd like, you can actually tint your gradient filter with a tone here, but I'm going to leave it at 0 for now because I don't want that to be affecting it, or else it's going to have that slight yellow tint. As you can see, it's become more red after I made it 0. So that's one filter. I'm going to make another one for the ground and towards me. Here, because the ground tends to be a little darker and a little softer, so we're going to try to draw the eye in by exposing the ground a little and boosting up the shadows. Because the neon light is casting a reddish hue on the ground, I'm going to make it slightly cooler toned in temperature. There we go. Now I'm going to balance it off again using contrast and exposure. Now I'm going to use the circle filter here. And this I use on more general areas and spots that I want to have a brush over it that doesn't need precision. For example, like this rainbow neon sign, as you can see, is a little, the details are getting really lost in the light and the exposure. It's supposed to be rainbow colored, so we're going to try to bring that all back. Sometimes afterwards I'll use Photoshop to bring back the colors, but that's more fine-tuning. I'm just trying to do a general edit to something I like, and then I can fine-tune that after in Photoshop. So now you can see the signs coming out. I'm going to do a quick one over here as well on the sign above my head. So using the gradient filter and the circle filter, you can achieve a more balanced photo. Lastly, what I like to do is I like to use split toning. Split toning allows you to create a certain mood or certain vibe just by using color here. And the great thing about night photos is that you can have more creative liberty to how you want to set the mood for the photos, unlike day shots where you might want to keep it to the most natural settings. For night shots, you can really change the tone of a photo just using split toning. So if you want Blade Runner vibes, or you want like, what other vibes are there? Oh, Ghost in the Shell vibes. You can kind of tune all your blues into like the aqua colors or whatever. So I'm going to show you that here using split toning. So for highlights, I'm going to keep it cooler because I like for my whites to pop more. As you can see, if you boost up the saturation, this is what happens to your photo. You can see ever so slightly the highlights of the entire photo are going to change to that shade. So whether you want more warm tones, so you want it to be super red, you can use red to orange undertones, or you can go pink if you like your pink vibes, you can go there. But I want to keep it more, I guess, more neutral, so I'm going to keep it more on the blues. And for shadows, I think I'm going to keep it more warm just to match the shade of the neon signs. So something like that. You can play around both of them and you'll see that the predominant colors that you choose in the split toning are going to come shine through. And then I'm going to go back with exposure because I feel like the colors are so intense that I'm getting lost in the photo. We actually shot this photo back in March just because, and I just haven't had time to do this tutorial, so it's just been sitting here. So hence why I'm editing now. Now I'm going to bump up the dehaze slightly. And as you can see, the signs are getting a little lost. I'm going to go back with the Radiant filter and I'm going to balance that back out. So it's just a lot of back and forth. There's no right or wrong, and it's not a linear process. I just go back and forth and play around with each thing just because for the night shots, I'm still learning and I still am trying to get a hang of it myself. Okay, so there you have it. Generally a neon edit that I'm happy with that I would post on Instagram. I hope this kind of gives you a basic understanding of how we edit neon lights. This is not by all means the way to do it, and it's not the answer, but just to show you just a little bit on how we have our own take on this. So if you liked this video, we would really appreciate it if you comment, liked, and subscribe to our channel, and we will see you in the next one. Bye!